We have a question here, and any other hands? Another question? Yes, two questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Julius Kramer from the Permanent Mission of Denmark, and this was a really fascinating discussion. I want to thank colleagues online for your thought leadership on this, and I've made some notes also on Sarah's point that leadership in this space is relational. Sometimes there's this perception that youth focused peace building is less sophisticated. It's a low-hanging fruit for programming. It is easier, sort of, awareness raising for young people will generate peace dividends, which I think we're learning is not true. And I think the study is maybe I'm being presumptuous by saying that it's probably one of the most comprehensive studies around on youth-led peace building and programming in that regard since YPS has been adopted. So there's a lot to be learned here from for the entire peace building field. So I think I'm getting to a point here, which is if we sort of aggregate these findings a little bit more and look at not only the lessons for youth or YPS programming or youth-led peace building, but what are the lessons that we can draw for the entire peace building field, where I think what I want to say challenges the assumption that youth-led peace building is easier is that you need to understand both generational age-based power dynamics, which are super complex, contextual, sometimes super localized contextual, and conflict dynamics, which demand so much more of program design and so much more of sensitivity, conflict sensitivity. So if you would sort of aggregate some of these findings and say, what can the entire peace building field, what sort of one insight that you would challenge the entire peace building field with, or something, an unconventional sort of truth or so that you would like to share, that we can also bring into as we talk about PBAR and colleagues in the room are in the middle of that process. Thanks.
Yes, thanks so much. My name's Lauren Phillips. I'm with the UN Volunteers Program. And well, firstly, congratulations on the event for this hugely important report, and huge thanks to the leadership, especially of the panelists today. It was wonderful to hear their interventions about their work. I had a question really about the links between young peace builders and volunteerism. So we know that up to 97% of young peace builders work in a voluntary capacity. So I was wondering if there were any findings that you had or any reflections about the importance of really fostering that sort of civil society and really strong volunteer organizations as a way to enable and support young peace builders more. It'd be interesting to hear your findings on that. Thank you.
Yeah, to take the first one, it's quite a challenge the entire peace building field. But I will say what's important about your question is it highlights that, there is this perception that youth-focused programming, like you said, that it's awareness raising, it's very soft, it's very easy. And I think what we saw across the board was actually quite sophisticated and strategic programming, both by youth activists and leaders and by those. So the example that Iman was bringing up with Guinea, they talked about it, the youth leaders, and said, like, we are facing a generational challenge at a particular moment. It was not a good political climate for them to be able to advance youth, but they thought strategically and said, how do we actually lay the seeds for essentially what is a broader enabling basic democratic participation, representation, and also peace building. And then when those dynamics shifted, we're really able to seize on the moment. So what we're talking about here is really not something that's just as light as just awareness raising about rights or something else like that, but really trying to position youth so that they can actually transform conflict dynamics. Another example that surprised me of that, so I led the research on the climate and natural resources related peace building. And in the beginning, it was actually very hard to find projects that were specifically focused on climate and youth, which is sort of counterintuitive because we all think about the amazing youth climate leaders around the globe, but it just hasn't been something that's coming up in peace building programming intentionally. But the interesting thing was when you got down to every single community and every natural resource challenge, who were the herders in the transhumance conflicts that they were trying to address? They were youth. Who were the ones that were the agriculturals and the fishers, most of the migrants who were moving because of climate-induced displacements, but also just in terms of at a community level, being willing to spearhead that change. So there was a project I mentioned briefly earlier in Côte d'Ivoire, and it was originally not about youth, and it was not about climate, but it was effectively about adaptation of both. So there had been an issue in terms of artisanal mining and environmental degradation, as well as other environmental problems related to climate change. and they organized community dialogues, and the elders in that community would say, oh, it's because youth are interested in agriculture, or it's the will of the gods. And it was young people who came to the forum and said, it's climate change, it's fossil fuels, we have to adapt to what we're doing here. And so I think what we're talking about here is more than just an awareness of rights, but being able to like really shift those dynamics in a way that is not just relevant for youth programming, but I would argue is a through line in every single one of these peace building projects. And then to the question about volunteerism, I mean, we saw huge enthusiasm, and you could probably speak to this more because you sat with the work that you went after this. And I think the spirit is there, but this is almost the underbelly or the flip side of the funding is that I think many youth activists and organizations would wish that they didn't have to volunteer as often and that they were actually kind of more financially sustainable in terms of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's totally your point is that there was, despite the sort of enthusiasm to engage, there's definitely a lot of frustration there, right? And you do see very often sort of youth activists having to, commit to a job on the side because at the end of the day, and I guess that gets to one of the big findings of the study as well, is simply that you cannot work in political inclusion without, sort of coupling that with economic inclusion. So it's not enough to rely on systems of volunteerism or whatnot, but you really have to, and I guess that gets to a point also that Sarah mentioned about like systems thinking.
Yeah.
Given the broad segment or constituency that they represent within the community, it's much more than just political inclusion. It's not even a minority at this point, so it's not a specific sub branch of like peace building. It's really how do you conceive of the role, the space, the empowerment, political and economic, that you give to that constituency within a broader society.
Also, I want to pass on to Brian also for his comment, but I do want to say that the thing about youth participation being a low-hanging fruit, just in the last 1 month, we heard of 2 young people being targeted and killed in one of our projects, PBF projects. So it is not something. It's something that comes with risk. It's not a low-hanging fruit. Young people are putting themselves at risk to be working on this, and just passing on to Brian for.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to leave. I have to leave in a minute, so let me take the occasion just to say thank you for a fantastic event, Bushra and your team, Erica, UNFPA for all the support, colleagues online. I wanted to get to a comment. I wanted to highlight a comment that Erica made early on and get to Julius's question about what can we learn from this comprehensive study, not just about youth, peace, and security, but about peace building writ large. And one of the connections there for me is civil society. So in the same way that we're talking about youth needing to be in a leadership position as agents, they need the socioeconomic support to make it happen, the volunteerism, I was going to make your point, but you made it better. Civil society in general, we want to put them in the driver's seat. We want to put them we want to empower them as agents. It's the key for not just sustainability from like a project financing sense, but it's the key for what Sarah referred to as, we're not doing projects and outputs. We're trying to support the growth of movements, right? And movements, sometimes a movement can make change in 6 months. Sometimes movements take decades and generations, right? And what we want to be doing is supporting the growth of those movements. I was thrilled to hear Erica point out that we are one of the only, or maybe we're catalytic in a fund or programming sense, where we're really explicitly trying to track how much support ends up going to youth-led organizations, women-led organizations, human rights defender organizations, peace-building local civil society organizations. What's important about us trying to track that is that it's not about us as the fund giving the money to those organizations. It's, the fund is a small footprint office sitting in New York because our institution at the country level is the United Nations family. We don't need a peace-building fund office at country level. We have the United Nations family. We have UNICEF and UNFPA and UNDP and others. And they, at country level, have national staff that speak the languages. I've been in those country offices, but often many of the staff come from civil society themselves. They have wonderful networks into civil society. They can do the flexibility. They can do the local language. They can do we don't need a log frame. They can do the accompaniment and the visiting. What we need to do as a fund is do a better job of conveying what the agencies are doing at country level in terms of their support. And in some cases, they need to do it better, right? They need to listen to the voices of those who are on screen, for example, to say, no, it's not about asking us to do something at the end of the chain. It's about involving us and supporting us in the first place. We as a fund need to use the resources, the scarce and tragically scarcer resources that we have to make sure that we're supporting agencies to do the right thing vis-a-vis local voices and power.
Thank you.